Hello, hello, hello. Sorry if you heard me chewing. See if I can get my volume up. I thought it was muted. The times that I want to be muted, I'm not. The times that I don't want to be muted, I am. So far, like you can see, I've got the law and crime stream up. It doesn't look like they are back yet. So, being the jurors, um, we can listen to them a little bit while I'm trying to plug along and see what has been said about how far away the jurors are or if they're still at the Moselle property. So I'm going to unmute this stream. And this is all just a recap.
Obvious. I didn't know them.
Sorry, a recap. It's definitely a recap. Hey, Stacy Bobbles. Yes. Oh my gosh. Why do I have my own self on my phone? That is ridiculous. Shut up. I do not want to hear myself. Thank you. I butt dialed my own stream. The jurors went out to Moselle this morning. I am unsure if they are back yet. The judge scheduled to be back in session at 11 this morning, but he also said, you know, who knows? It depends on how long it takes out there. I think someone said it took 20 or 30 minutes to get to the Moselle property from the courthouse in Colleton County. So yeah, and they were just reporting too that Jim Griffin is going to do the closing arguments for the defense, not Harpootlian. I think that's a good idea for the defense. I think it's a sad idea for me because I just want to be able to hear Pooters one last time so I can be irritated one last time. But that's my cat. And he's not dying. He's just annoying. Again, I'm going to look this up and unmute their stream while I look up to see what people are saying on Twitter on how far away the jurors are. So I will do that real quick.
He's deceitful. He has misled really everybody in his life, his family, his partners, his friends, the police. So this is going to be a theme that we're going to hear from the prosecution that he's in here now asking you to believe him that he didn't kill his wife and his son. Let's look at his track record. Let's look what he's done up to this point. There's an old common law adage, false as in one, false as in all. And I think that's what the prosecution is going to pound away at in their closing argument.
And Matt, let me get your perspective from the defense side. I agree with you. I think that the prosecution is going to be highlighting the credibility or lack thereof of Alec Murdaugh to this jury. But on a defense perspective, Matt, what do you expect to hear once they start arguing to this jury?
Well, it's going to be about doubt. They're going to pound away at doubt. They're going to hammer. I mean, the last witness that the prosecution called on rebuttal said that he couldn't say for sure whether there were one or two shooters. So they're going to pound away at those types of issues. How did someone shoot two people without any defensive wounds with two different guns in very close proximity to one another? So they're going to pound away at those issues that this is a circumstantial case, and the prosecution hasn't met its burden beyond a reasonable doubt. There are a lot of issues here that just don't add up when you look at the totality of the evidence that the prosecution presented.
And Joseph, let's talk about some of the actual investigation and the crime scene investigation that occurred in this case. And we've been talking about that. One of the issues that the prosecution may have is the way the crime scene was treated after these murders occurred. Do you think that the defense will be looking to really highlight that to this jury to raise that reasonable doubt?
Yeah, most certainly. As a matter of fact, reflecting back, there was actually a great witness that the defense put up, if I remember correctly. And it was one of the the former law partners that talked about how he was out there and he witnessed all of these items lying about relative to the scene, what he saw out there. He saw people coming and going through all of these areas. And this guy is a civil attorney. He's not engaged in criminal defense in any way, at least to my understanding. And he was even able to appreciate this, that there was something wrong. So they put him up there for a reason. I think that this is something that they're going to hammer at, as my buddy Matt had just stated. They're going to hammer away in that particular area, scene security, collection of evidence, perhaps even processing of evidence. I think that's going to be a big part of it moving forward, certainly in closing.
And you know, we're going to take a quick break here at Law and Crime, but when we come back, I'm going to be talking to you, and I have a lot more questions that I'd love to ask both you gentlemen, because your insight is always so great here. And we are what I like to say or call summation watch here at Law and Crime. We are waiting for closing arguments in the Alec Murdaugh trial to begin. When they do, we're going to go live into that courtroom so you don't miss a minute of it. But we have to take a quick break here at Law and Crime. Stay tuned here at Law and Crime.
Okay, I can't find anywhere online that states where the jurors are. Oh my gosh. Here, I'm glad I'm not on camera. So I don't really know. We're on like juror watch, like Santa Claus coming in for Christmas Eve. When will he be there? We need an actual, actually, no, we do not need a tracker. We don't need a physical live tracker because that sounds dangerous. And I really think I know they said they had security. I personally don't see the point in them going down to the Moselle property completely because the shed is no longer on the property. The kennels are, but I know you can see like the distance and get a better picture on how far away the house is from the kennels. But I think you don't get the entire picture without the shed there, because from my understanding, it seems like that night, Maggie was kind of walking out toward the shed, or anyway, she was standing near it. And when, from like the crime scene evidence for what the forensics have said, she turned around when she heard the gunshots and started heading toward the kennel. I kind of think that's imperative for taking in the whole idea of what happened that night. I don't feel like it's completely detrimental. I think it would be if both buildings were gone. But I do find it possibly to be like an inaccurate perspective. And yes, like leaves aren't out yet, which is still sometimes a foreign thing to me. Originally being from Florida, we didn't have any trees, hardly, maybe one or two that lost leaves. Just had pine trees everywhere pretty much. But so that's going to be a little different in whether or not, just my perspective on whether or not people could hear gunshots from far away or not. I mean, leaves can be a little sound buffer, so I don't know. I'm just concerned with the jurors going out there. I fear for their safety. Right? Yeah, it's why they usually don't tear down houses of horrific crimes until the cases are resolved. I agree. I'm still floored. I might try to pull this up because, again, I don't know how long the jurors are going to be out. But with John Marvin's testimony a few days ago, and going to the crime scene. They cleared the crime scene in less than 24 hours, which is unheard of, and I understand and believe there was intimidation on the part, not SLED intimidating, but SLED and law enforcement feeling intimidated because it was the Murdaughs. Definitely believe that is why the investigation wasn't as tight as it normally is. That is not a common thing in South Carolina, to let people, go back to their house, to let people walk all over a crime scene. That is not typical at all. But when you're generations of attorneys, solicitors, when you're best friends with the sheriff and the lead DNR officer, when, as Alex said, wearing his solicitor badge made interactions with law enforcement more friendly. They were a little more warm in interactions. So there has never been a time other than now where they have been held accountable for anything that they have done. If you watch the Netflix documentary, you also saw that, as Paul's girlfriend mentioned, Paul got in an accident, flipped the truck. Pardon me, don't call 911, just call my grandpa. Grandpa, mom, and dad come out there, clean up the beer cans, handle everything, make it all disappear and go away. So these are all things that people are used to encountering in regard to the Murdaughs. I would be intimidated, as it seems like they are. Okay, I'm just making sure this is not actual closing arguments. There's no way that they just started with that, is it?
Neither Paul nor Maggie had any defensive wounds. Neither one of them had any defensive wounds. As if they didn't see a threat coming from their attacker. And the evidence is also going to show that both Pat, Maggie, and Paul were shot at extremely close range. The evidence is going to show it's called stippling. It's almost like a tattoo, that when you get shot very close to a weapon, it leaves marks that the forensic pathologist can see. They were shot at close range and they did not have defensive wounds.
But we can listen to this a little bit. I would like to, as kind of a recap, how they started.
And the evidence is going to show that the defendant, Alec Murdaugh over there, told anyone who would listen that he was never at those kennels. But the evidence is also going to show from these things that every one of us, most of us carry around in our pocket, that he was there. And he was there just minutes before, with Maggie and Paul, just minutes before their cell phones were silent forever. Despite what he told people, I was never at the kennels, the cell phones are going to show otherwise. You're also going to hear evidence that about a week after the murders, Mr. Alec's father had died, granddaughter, and about a week after the murders, he shows up early in the morning at his parents' home, where his mother still is in late-stage Alzheimer's, on Alameda in Hampton. It's uncharacteristic for him to show up early, uncharacteristic for him to show up at all like that. And he comes in and he's carrying something in a blue tarp. And he takes it upstairs. And eventually law enforcement finds out about that. And they go upstairs and they find a wadded up, very, very large raincoat in a blue color. Could look like a tarp. And you're going to hear evidence that it was coated with gunshot residue on the inside.
And just to be clear, I'm going to shut all the way up during
You're going to hear other evidence of
testimony
gunshot
argument.
residue. You're going to hear that there was gunshot residue on Alec. That's the
I won't
scene.
do my normal,
You're going
like,
to hear the evidence that there was gunshot residue on the seatbelt of the car he was driving.
screaming.
You're going to hear evidence that when law enforcement got to the scene, he had gone and gotten a shotgun,
until
whole
they're finished to
shotgun,
do that.
and that Maggie's DNA was on that shotgun. You're going to hear other evidence from
Again, this
DNA,
right now is a recap
gunshot
of
residue,
opening statements.
firearms examiners. There's going to be a lot of forensic evidence in this case. I'm not
No
going to get into
word
every
so
single
far
right
that
now,
I
but
can
will say
find on where the jurors currently
that a
are,
key
if
piece
they're
of
still in
forensic evidence
hotel,
that you're going to hear in
or if
this
they're on
case.
the way, or if
This is
they're in the
cell
jury room. Not sure. If anybody knows,
Alec's cell
let me
phone,
know.
Maggie's cell phone, Paul's cell phone. You know, this is all amazing technology that most of us carry around in our pockets. It really allows us to do a lot of things and to get a lot done. But this cell phone keeps track of who we're talking to, who we're calling, who we're texting, whenever we access apps. And every time you do that, there's a record kept in this phone unless it's deleted somehow. And if you're using certain apps, you can even get GPS information where you were when you did that that's stored on these phones. You're going to hear evidence about that. You're going to hear evidence that when you make a call and it pings off the cell towers, the location information can be gathered from that as well. And so it allows an investigation to take this and piece together what someone was doing on a particular day, and not only what they were doing, but who they were interacting with and how they were interacting with them. On that 911 call and on the body-worn cameras. Pay attention to what he says. Look at how he's acting. But he says within a few minutes of each one of those, he says, this is about the boat case. This is about the boat case. And you're going to hear some of what was going on in Alex Murdaugh's life leading up to that day. Stuff that happened that very day, stuff that was leading up, a perfect storm that was gathering, much like the storms that are coming outside today. Listen for that evidence. Listen to that gathering storm that all came to a head on June 7th, 2021, the day the evidence will show he killed Maggie and Paul. This has been a long, exhaustive investigation. And it's going to be a fairly long trial because it's complicated. It's a journey. There's a lot of aspects to this case. There's a lot of factors to this case. But like a lot of things that are complicated, when you start to put them all together, piece them together like a puzzle, all of a sudden the picture emerges and it's really simple.
Okay, there you have Cretan Waters giving his opening statement to the jury. Many weeks ago now, we've had a lot of evidence come before that jury in the interim, and we are waiting now for closing arguments to start. We'll go live into court as soon as that starts in terms of closing arguments. But let's break down what we just saw with my two great guests joining me today. I have Joseph Scott Morgan and also Matthew Mangino. Matt, I want to start with you. In an opening statement, as an attorney, you don't necessarily want to promise something you can't deliver. Do you think that the prosecution delivered what they told that jury in terms of the evidence that they would see or hear during the course of this trial?
Well, I think that they put on the evidence that they had. Again, this is all circumstantial in terms of the evidence in this case. I think the evidence with regard to the cell phones is strong evidence. But if I was defending this case, if I was about to make my closing argument, I'd go right back to exactly what was said by the prosecution in the opening, and that is that these homicides occurred in very close proximity to one another. And in fact, there was stippling that was present. And in fact, that there were no defensive wounds, which again brings me back to this issue of doubt. I mean, how does a single person shoot two people in close proximity with two different guns, a rifle and a shotgun, and there not be any defensive wounds? That's really, I think, an issue that the defense has to pound away at in their closing argument.
Yeah, and Joseph, we've talked about some of the forensic evidence that both sides have presented during the course of this trial. And you saw the prosecution talking about some of that in the opening statements. What do you think are going to be the key points from a forensic standpoint that both sides could sort of hit home or look to as they close up to this jury?
Prosecution is definitely going to be digital forensics. Just as, Waters had pointed out in his opening statement, I go back to that. I think that that's going to be their biggest point that they can kind of drive home as to the.
Okay. I muted them and I'm going to oh, let me see. One thing, Brian Enton, is that how you pronounce his last name? About 23 minutes ago, had posted on Twitter, pardon me, that the jury is headed back to the courthouse. So again, I believe someone said it took like 20 or 30 minutes to get to the courthouse from Moselle. And I'm assuming they probably have to settle in, could take a pee break, maybe vomit a little bit, whatever. But here are my predictions. I believe we are going to get a verdict on Friday. And I believe it's going to be a hung jury. Sasha, you can disagree with me all you want, dog, but I am correct. You don't even understand these things. I'm a human, you're not, okay? So there you go on that one. But yeah, that's my prediction. Maybe I'll even write that and pin that up. Let's do that right now. Right now. Ooh, someone's got a little sign out there. Justice coming soon. Who is that dude? I don't know why I think that's funny. Like, it's... Let me unmute, see what they're saying about it. Anyone saying anything about it? No? Just filming it? Cool. We have people in downtown Greenville that stand on the corners on Main Street. Sasha, are you drunk? Lord, my dog, I don't know what's wrong with her. But they stand on the street corners, especially nights and weekends. Well, the weekend nights, and hand out, tracts and damn everybody to hell with their megaphones. So I don't know why, but that's what that guy holding the sign reminds me of. I wonder if he is related at all to any of the victims. Justin Bamberg, one of our senators here in South Carolina, I can't remember what district, I believe it's somewhere the Midlands, which is the area kind of surrounding, well, the middle of the state, and our capital would be included in that, Columbia, not the country, So, so you're going to tell him to go, we're going to have beef? Oh, we're going to have beef. Nope. We're just having potatoes. Okay, no beef. So, I am nervous. I feel like the verdict's about to come back and they haven't even done closing arguments. Man, sorry to get so distracted, but it's me. I remember back in 2021 listening to the Murdaugh Murders podcast, like maybe episodes in. It was right after the it was right after Paul and Maggie were murdered that she started creating the. She had been investigating the family since the boat crash in 2019. And I believe she has stated, quoting her, that she kind of did the podcast as like an outlet because she was uncovering so much and it was a lot to emotionally deal with. Plus, you know, information, chauvinist shit that would be said to her, to include Dick Harpootlian at one of, gosh, I can't remember if it Paul's hearing or, well, I guess, so I guess it was maybe hearing for something, being indicted on financial crimes. I don't know, but he made a really sexist comment about to her in the courtroom in front of everyone. So again, you got to imagine, if you will, seeing people be able to manipulate and use their ties to either law enforcement or the judicial system to the things that they did go away. And yes, the public knew about it. I didn't know quite how corrupt South Carolina was until listening to her podcast. Okay, we've got law enforcement. So does that mean the jurors are coming back? I think that one guy is like over Alec. Pardon me. Fiction only. I don't know if I can spell, so think of that. I completely lost my train of thought. I really thought they would be back by now. So I thought I wouldn't have to talk as much. But yet here I am. So again, I think I'm gonna why not? Since everyone was there, I'll just freaking pull it up. Stop screen. So Brian Eaton went to the Moselle properties today, I guess.
From Moselle, back in that area is where the dog kennels are. There's this cottage here. The deputies are still out. But
this was like 23,
just want to give you a little perspective.
Whatever minutes ago. So I want to rewind that. So that little house right there, it was not considered to be part of the crime scene the night of the murders. That's on their property. I believe it's near the dog kennels. Let me go back. Oh my goodness. Why do I have such a difficult time being me? Let's kind of get music with me. Really good music. I don't know. We'll just push play and see what he says. Here we go.
So this is the wooded area that the jury stopped along the main road and walked into here. The jury's now gone, obviously. It's on the opposite side of the street from Moselle. Back in that area is where the dog kennels are. There's this cottage here.
I wonder if that's where Maggie's
The deputies are still out here.
Across the street.
But just want to give you a little perspective. So the dog kennels are right back there, and that's the wooded area over there where the jurors walked in. So this is the wooded area that the jury stopped along the main road and walked into.
Sorry, I thought I was muted. You can probably hear me chewing. I'm eating cold pizza for breakfast-ish. So let me see if I can pull up another one of his videos because he had another one. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I hope those cars, those vehicles were tinted like a mofo. I don't understand why it was important to film them coming and going. I feel like that's pretty dang rude. Stacy says, I agree with you on the hung jury. The state would be embarrassed by the police work done on this case. Oh, should be. Yes, they really should. But I don't fault them. As much as that probably sounds ridiculous. Again, I haven't encountered these people. I've only encountered some folks up here in the upstate similar to them. And it's very kind of eerie how, oh my gosh, neighbors, please don't look through my window and see me. None of my neighbors know I have a YouTube channel. I want to keep it that way like forever. But so it's difficult to predict how far someone will go to retaliate when you have called them out for wrongdoing. And I was involved in calling someone out and bringing to the attention of those that needed the attention to be brought. Hey, Robbie S., welcome. It's something was hung over my head, not anything that I did bad, but the care of a loved one that I had was kind of hung over my head in terms of what I felt was retaliation and intimidation for bringing up, a policy that wasn't being upheld, something that they could have really gotten in trouble for the demographic that they were serving. And yeah, I got phone calls to my home telling me to stop or telling my loved ones to tell me to stop. I never anticipated, like, I knew they had the power and authority to provide service for the loved one that I'm speaking of. But I never in my mind thought that they would use that as a intimidation and manipulative tactic to get me to shut up and stop protesting. And it worked, because I'm not going to have my now, mind you, nobody was necessarily getting harmed in the process. It was just something quite unethical. And I had still given it to the first line of authority, if you will. And although I was planning to go further because that first line of authority was not going further, to me, I still had like a cover my ass because it was in writing to multiple people, and there was a paper trail that I had contacted people, and they did read it and see it. So, yeah, right. I always wondered how a glorified criminal lawyer would commit a perfect murder. Well, this is it. Yeah, I think Oh,
Perhaps. I
Oh my
think
goodness,
that
oh my
his
goodness.
comments relative to cell phone data.
I'm going to take this off right now. I thought they were back, but it's still law and crime. I have another feed on my phone with my headphones to let me know when they get back in. I don't want to sit here and listen to Law and Crime Network. They're just kind of regurgitating the same things. But I think without technology, and I think without people like Mandy Matney bringing to light the things that were occurring, I think he definitely would have gotten away with this. And I still kind of think, I personally don't think he's going to be found guilty. I would be shocked like a mofo. Unlike most other people, I do believe the state has provided a good case. And as he said, and as I've read online, I think I shared a Reddit post that a former criminal prosecutor shared in regard to circumstantial evidence. That person explained circumstantial evidence is evidence. There's circumstantial, there's direct. Circumstantial isn't bad, it's either strong or weak. Direct evidence isn't bad, it's either strong or weak. The example that they gave for weak direct evidence is an eyewitness. A lot of times eyewitnesses get it wrong, especially if a traumatic event has occurred. Think of how many innocent people have been put in jail by identifying the wrong person. So having direct evidence isn't necessarily a slam dunk guilty verdict. Having circumstantial evidence is also not a slam dunk. I don't know if I just said the opposite. You get what I'm saying. Neither one should guarantee a guilty or innocent verdict. They're just weaker or stronger. Of course, I believed he was guilty when the trial started. With things, if anyone's a fan of Mandy's podcast, you kind of knew like how many coincidences and dead people can you have around a family, can you have around a person without this brings a good opportunity too. Let me bring up Liz's Twitter. How many coincidences can you have? Alec Murdaugh lied under oath on the stand when he was saying that a law enforcement officer gave him permission to have blue lights installed in his car as a volunteer solicitor. That was proven to be a lie when the state brought him in to testify and say, hey, did you permit this? Did anybody under you permit this? Is this a thing that you did? Is it a thing that you guys ever did? And it was no. He lied under oath. He lied to everyone in his family. He was placed at the scene of the crime. Hey, Sasha, literally stop. Hey, if you can't handle it, I don't know what to do, but just shush, please. Sorry. One moment. I apologize. Okay. Yeah, and I'm saying police officer. I can't remember if at the time he was sheriff, what his actual position is, but I believe he was someone of higher rank. I just can't remember what it was. So, yeah, Alec is placed at the scene of the crime. Within minutes of them being murdered. He's proven to have lied to law enforcement, to his family, to his friends. He has lied on the stand. And yes, lying does not make someone a murderer. But when you know just by being the husband and father of the deceased and by being the one who found the bodies, you're going to be a suspect. And at that point, it's more like we're just ruling you out. It's just because statistically, people that find the bodies and or are that closely related tend to be the ones that did it. So it's not a personal thing. He should have known that. He did know that. Especially being an attorney and a volunteer solicitor, he knew that. If you knew there was a chance of your lies coming out and you knew how that would look, why would you lie? If you're, I don't even want to say if you're innocent, why would you lie? Because, there is like police intimidation, things like that, but I don't think this is one of those circumstances. And, lying to his family and friends, his own brother, they're not in law enforcement. So I don't buy it. All right. I'm going to pull up. Liz is the another person who works on the Murdaugh Murders podcast, and she had a quote yesterday from someone close to Alec, and I believe they said it very, very well. Okay. Let's see if I can share the screen so you can follow along. Liz Farrell says, from someone who knew Maggie and Alec and their relationship very well and for more than 30 years, Alec is able to rationalize bad acts to the point where he could fool himself into thinking he wasn't really hurting people when he was stealing from them. So many people keep asking me if I think he did it. They say they can't believe he'd go from the way they were on that video to killing them minutes later. But I think he could. I think he had already decided, and I knew in my heart from the beginning that it was him. Quotation. Oh, yeah, she's explaining her quotation marks. So that's someone they claim to have known him for more than 30 years. And they're stating that, which I think is pretty powerful. I also don't understand a lot of people's explanation about there's no motive. First of all, I think there's plenty of motive, but also I don't think there has to be a motive necessarily to prove someone is guilty. Some people just freaking snap and kill people. I mean, I think what people are wanting is for it to make sense to them why someone would take someone's life. Not even necessarily that they would justify it, but just follow their train of thought. I think when someone's pretty evil and manipulative, I hope it would be difficult for me to follow their train of thought. Oops, it looks like maybe not. I see someone in the feed, but I'm unsure. Let's see. I don't hear anything in my headphones, so it just looks like someone is entering. Maybe the clerk. Let's go back to law and crime. I'm going to mute it though. Oh, it's already muted. And you can't even see it because I'm sharing my screen. Let's just pull that back up just in case. Stacy says most people who have decided to do something don't act suspicious. The point is to be able to carry out your plan, not alert others. True. Hey, people, I'm about to kill them. Just want to let you guys know. I don't think so. Robert asks, was he afraid of his wife and son? In a threatening way, like physically threatening? I don't think so. If you're asking, like, why I think he killed them, oh yeah, this is going back to Buster being on the stand, where I'm again, his mom and brother don't deserve to be murdered, but when he sat up there on the stand and said, neither myself or anybody in the family believes Paul was driving the boat, I was just like, oh my God, you're as sick and manipulative as all of them. Cool, cool, cool. Here's my theory. Alex's world was crumbling around him. His financial crimes were starting to be uncovered. The boat crash and Mandy Matney were making it very difficult for him to hide his financial mishaps. His whole life was under, at least financially, was under investigation due to the boat crash, because he was saying he didn't have the funds, for a settlement. He didn't have this, didn't have that. So they were looking into it. I'm like, okay, let's check it out. Let's see. Do you not? How do you not? I think he saw an opportunity in front of him to, oh, and everyone harps on that there's no life insurance on them. Sure, there wasn't. But Maggie, her name was on the property, and the Edisto property. If he needed money to pay back whatever, the clients, to cover up his, the fact that he stole it, he needed to get money fast from somewhere. He had to be able to sell the property. And again, it hasn't been confirmed, but I've read through the grapevine that Maggie did not want to sell the property to help him. I don't know. I don't think she wanted to sell the property to get liquid assets to be able. I'm not even going to say for the boat crash, but I just think she was unwilling to sell the properties, is what I have read. So she was kind of standing in the way of that. Well, if you just murdered your wife, that's going to look real suspicious. If your son, who is involved in the boat crash, who the whole town and state, at least at that point, I can't remember if that was national news at that point, but are looking at him and his family, the fact that they're not taking accountability, trying to make anything right, and the fact that he's still out partying. Everyone's very critical. There's a spotlight on them. His own friends are rightfully pissed off at him. What a perfect opportunity to be able to take Paul's life, not have to deal with the criminal trial of the boat crash, because if Paul's no longer alive, you can't have a criminal trial on him. You can sit there and blame, as he did later with the roadside shooting and the composite sketch that he gave the details for, and looking like one of the gentlemen that was on the boat. Most everybody, that's the first thing that they thought of. And then having this history with law enforcement and the judicial system where people are willing to cover for you and not look further into things for fear of retaliation. I think for him, it was a perfect opportunity to fix a lot of his problems. I don't think he wanted to do it. I don't think he wanted to kill them. But I feel like he thought he had to solve his problems. Yes, Stacey. I think he was afraid of his house of cards collapsing with the substance abuse, money crimes, and the boat accident. He probably felt he had no other options. I completely agree. And I know people are saying the whole substance abuse thing, but I don't know. I'm sure he probably popped a pill or two. I mean, I don't see any reason for Paul's girlfriend at this point to lie or to ever lie, honestly. But so she said she witnessed things, but I don't think it was as bad as it's being portrayed to be. I think that money went toward other things. I just believe it's physically impossible for him to do that amount of illegal substances and function. What was it, 50 grand a week, they're saying? I mean, I don't know how much shit costs, but I don't think so. I will quote Liz Farrell in saying, drug trafficking costs money and needs investors to succeed. If you want to piece those two together, that's your own conclusion. I won't dispute it. I won't disagree with it. That's not what I'm saying. But if you draw that conclusion between the two, I don't take issue with it. I hate these people. Oh my God. Are we going to do it or what, people? Let me go back on Twitter again and see if we've got a heads up anywhere. I love Eric Bland. Oh, I heard something on the microphone. I think we're in, people. I think we're in. We are. Why is Law and Crime not catching up? Okay, I may have to go to a different feed then. Hold up. For me, bringing it up. Let's see. I'll just stream this part for now and try to bring back. I like pulling up Law and Crime because they have different camera angles. The judge just basically said, do you guys have any, any issues before we bring the jury in? So that's what they are discussing right now. I don't know what they could have. What else could happen? What else they would need to deal with? Let's see. Law and Crime, how's it back up? I wonder if they're just having too many people watch their channel because it's not really loading. So we may just have this one angle for now. Okay, so we've got Creighton Waters, Dick Harpootlian, and who's the dude beside Dick Harpootlian? I don't know. What is Pork and Beans up to now? Whatever it is, he doesn't seem too happy about it. God, he's like a evil, grumpy troll. It's like a different pair of glasses than even the day before. They were thicker frames before. Shall we do some lip reading? Judge, can you believe this guy shit his pants? I don't know. I don't know about shitting pants. I can't. Okay. Oh, there's Griffin. What is their issue? I so wish we could hear. Like, the jurors aren't there. Let us just hear. We want to know. Hello, how are you? You have not started yet, but they are just now back in the courtroom. Jurors aren't in there yet. I'm a little irritated that it took this long because I would have, got other things done, but here we are. I wonder if Maggie's family is there. Or perhaps they'd be there for the verdict. Ooh. I wonder. I had tried to look up and see whether or not the, I guess it would be Maggie's niece, if she's still a teacher here in Greenville, because I don't, again, want to bring this up to like the wrong people and be insensitive. I would hate to do that. The jurors went to the Moselle property where the crimes were committed. I believe someone showed that they also went in this wooded area across the street, and it looked like it was across the street from the little cabin that was there near the kennels. That was never part of the crime scene. But I think, if I'm remembering and understanding correctly, that could be where Maggie's phone was found. I know that someone said, I believe it was John Marvin, his Alex brother, that said when they did the find a phone that her phone was somewhere near that cabin. And I find it interesting that, again, even though I find it interesting that both John Marvin and Alec are kind of telling us everything that happened, but just saying it in a different way. As he did one little manipulative thing that's oh so common around here. I'm not trying to criticize SLED, but I'm not trying to blame anybody. That means he is criticizing them and he is blaming them. Again, I'm sure that way of speaking is not limited to South Carolina. Oh, it happens so much. It's so gross when I hear it. I'm like, just have the balls say it. We don't have to do this roundabout dancy-do. I'm white. I can't dance. I have no rhythm. So let's just get on with it. I mean, say what you got to say. So, yeah, it's, again, this faux politeness, humbleness, bless your heartness that, again, I take issue with, because when I grew up in Florida, when people said bless your heart, they actually meant like, oh no, sweet person. But here they mean it as you're an idiot. So it's an insult. If you can't tell, I'm a little bitter about South Carolina. I love it. I absolutely love it. But I believe they've like perverted Southern culture. Sorry if anybody here. They've tainted it, I guess, maybe a better term for it. The sayings, the mannerisms are very similar, but the intent behind it is different, and it makes me angry because I've even heard and seen people. Shut your mouth. 1 second. I apologize. Talk amongst yourselves.
Mr. Waters, so
God, can you believe how rude my husband called me during closing arguments? I do have to tell you that he has been so excited again since about 2021. Ever since I listened to the podcast, I have been like, oh my gosh, do you know these people? Do you work with these people? Because my husband works in the middle of the state a lot, and he has some ties to the low country. I'll just say that. So, been like, don't don't work for this person. Don't do this. Okay, I am. It says I'm muted. Oh my God, are they like necking? Like what's going on? Such a dick. But we'll say it was around 6 months ago, finally annoyed one of my neighbors enough where she started listening to the podcast, and the very next day she was like, I've listened to 3 episodes and I can't stop. I'm like, you're welcome. But yeah, he is quite pleased I have other people to talk to about this. He is tired of hearing about it. He gives me like a, all right, 5 minutes. Why does Alec look so chipper? Didn't you see the guy with the sign outside? Justice is coming. And again, oh, I love how these 2 ladies that are sitting are pretending not to listen to the conversation. That'd be me. Like writing in a little notebook or something with my neck all craned around, like doo, 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 doo. I'm not listening to nothing.
The jury.
Okay, dog, if you come in here, you have to shush your mouth.
All right.
I'll
They
kick you
bring
out
the jury.
All right, here we go. I can't believe this is happening. Closing arguments. I'll put my little prediction that I had earlier up here. It's my opinion. Just as I said before, when I said if Alec goes on the stand, I will shit myself. I did not, but you know, if he is found guilty, I will shit myself. More figuratively, but who knows, you know? There's always hope, right? Let's get to getting, people. We are waiting. You guys had plenty of shuffle your papers. Unshuffle. Don't do it. Sasha, go lay down. Lay down on the couch. Mind your business.
The jury is present, sir. All right, thank you.
Let's wait till everyone gets settled. All right, welcome again, once again. Day number 7. And you have heard all of the testimony, received all of the evidence. You've visited the scene of the crimes, and now it's time for closing arguments. First, by the state, Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good morning. It's been a long trial, hasn't it? On June 7th, 2021, at the Moselle property in Colleton County, Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh were brutally and maliciously murdered at the kennels by Alec Murdaugh. Paul, as you know, suffered 2 shotgun blasts. Maggie suffered 5 blackout rifle wounds. And after an exhaustive investigation, there is only one person who had the motive, who had the means, who had the opportunity to commit these crimes, and also whose guilty conduct after these crimes betrays him. The defendant was the one person who was living a lie. The defendant is the person on which a storm was descending, and the defendant is a person where his own storm would actually mean consequences for Maggie and Paul. and consequences for those who trusted him. And that person is the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh. I know this has been a long trial because it's a complicated case. And I'm not going to talk forever, I promise. But I am going to try to distill this down for you. And the first thing I want to do is set the stage. And to set the stage, we have to understand a little bit about Alec Murdaugh and who he was and who he is. He was a person of singular prominence and respect in this community. But he's also a person who's been able to avoid accountability for all of his life. While he was outwardly giving the illusion of wealth and a very lucrative law practice, some bad land deals and that sort of thing, exacerbated by the economic recession, led to some financial problems. And then he had some big cases in the early 2011, 2012. And all his partners, and you've heard testimony to this, thought that that had taken care of things. You've heard cases like the Thomas case and the Pinckney case and the Plyler case and the Badger case. But the evidence that you've heard shows that the defendant became so addicted and so dependent on a velocity of money that the millions of dollars in legal fees that he was receiving was not enough. And so he started to steal. And how did he steal? He stole by billing personal expenses to the firm. He stole by stealing from his own family. You heard the testimony about the check he stole from his brother Randy. But then the main ways were two schemes that he developed. And the first one was to get checks made out from the client trust account to Palmetto State Bank, to fast talk the staff, fast talk the clients with those disbursements, and then take it to Palmetto State Bank, where his buddy Russell Lafitte would convert those and use those to pay personal expenses. And each time, until the end, it worked because the client was also getting a big check. And they were walking out of there thinking that everything had been fine when it was not. But then in 2015, he opened up the fake Forge account. And then all he had to do was get disbursements paid out to the Forge account. And once he did that, he would convert those to his personal use. And to do that, though, he also had to fast talk staff and fast talk clients. And that scheme continued up until everything fell apart in the end. The other thing you have to understand is during this time when he's earning millions of dollars and stealing millions of dollars, he's also borrowing millions of dollars from the bank, his law partners, his father, and it still wasn't enough. And this slow burn was continuing and continuing until the boat crash happened in February of 2019. Changed everything. That set in motion things that were going to happen because of the criminal charges related to that case, as well as the civil charges related to that case. And in the aftermath of the boat case, things changed. The pace of his stealing increased. In fact, that's when he stole the money from Tony Satterfield that you heard from. Ultimately stole about $4.5 million between the Satterfields and others. And unlike other cases, Satterfield, who was the son of his longtime housekeeper, he took all the money, took every bit of it. And that was coming to a head as we move into the spring of 2021, because there had been some publicity, and you heard from Tony Satterfield that he was, the defendant reached out in the spring of 2021 because there had been publicity and saying, hey, I'm still working on the case. Everything's fine. I'm still working on the case. It's good. But the reality is the defendant didn't have that money to pay it back. And he had one saving grace, because as you've heard, they don't get paid until the end of the year. And his saving grace was the Ferris case, which they tried in December. They get the verdict and get paid in March. And that's when he convinces Chris Wilson to send those $792,000 of fees to him. But the problem is that only lasted for about 2 months. $792,000 only lasted for about 2 months. and then he's running out of money again. Meanwhile, you've heard in the boat case that Mark Tinsley was seeking to get a large personal recovery from Alec Murdaugh of $10 million. He thought, as many people did, that he was wealthy and had a lot of money. And when they said he didn't, he filed a motion to compel. And you've heard testimony about whether or not that had been granted, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what Mark Tinsley was seeking to do. And that boat case hearing had been scheduled for June 10th. In May of 2021, as we move into June, that's when Alec's own paralegal got the expense check for the Ferris case, but not the fee check, and tried to raise that to Alec and couldn't get a straight answer, tried to raise it to Chris Wilson and couldn't get a straight answer, to his office. And so goes to Jeannie Seconder, and Jeannie Seconder goes to the partners, and they can't get an answer about that either. And they want an answer to that because they're worried, because Alec has been talking about structuring fees, and they're worried he may be trying to hide assets because of the boat case, and they don't want to be a part of that. All of these things are coming to a head, and his finances are falling apart. And you heard from the banker there. You heard where his finances were at on June 7th, 2021. And you saw what happened in the wake of that. Within a short period of time, he was negative $347,000. On June 7th, 2021, he was in the office. He was working on the boat case, working on those financial disclosures, when Jeannie Seconder came in and confronted him about those fees that he no longer had and couldn't pay back. And on June 7th, 2021, and he tells this to Jeannie Seconder, his father, Randolph, is having a very difficult time. And while they might have said it was some positive news, the reality is that he was very, very sick. And he had always been someone that the defendant could go to, that he could borrow money from. And so that pressure is happening as well. And on June 7th, 2021, as all these pressures were mounting, the defendant killed Maggie and Paul. And how do we know that? We're going to talk in detail about that. But the timeline puts him there. The forensic timeline puts him there. The use of his family weapons corroborates that. And his lies and guilty actions afterwards confirms it. And we'll go over each of those in great detail. Before we get to that, though, I want to finish out, because in the wake of this, everything changes. All those things that were coming to a head immediately go away. It's a different world now. They're not asking about the Ferris fees anymore. And you heard testimony to that. Mark Tinsley doesn't believe the case is going to have the same value anymore because the sympathies of the case have changed after this tragedy. And you heard that. And who would better understand that than Alec Murdaugh, who does the same work? The boat case hearing goes away, and everyone immediately rallies around Alec Murdaugh. And it worked, because it allowed him to borrow $250,000 from Johnny Parker, his law partner, who of course wouldn't have loaned him that money if he knew what Alec was up to, and allowed him to go to Palmetto State Bank and get $350,000 in an off-the-books loan that hadn't even been applied for, and to send that money to Chris Wilson and convince Chris Wilson to pay another $192,000 of his own money, and to send an email to the firm that everything was okay. And that made it another month or so until Annette Griswold found that Ferris check in his office, and Jeannie Seconder looked up the forged accounts. And what happened in the wake of that? What was the reaction of Alec Murdaugh? Within a day of September 3rd of him being forced to resign. His buddy Chris Wilson is trying to see him, comes and sees him on September 4th and confronts him about what he's been doing. And then within 2 hours, the side of the road happens. And Alec is a victim again. When accountability was at his door, he was a victim again. And he told a extremely detailed lie and went so far as to draw a competent sketch with the police of this assailant. And the accountability that had arrived at his doorstep again, he tried to get it to go away, and it worked for a little while. People thought, oh my gosh, what's happened here? Should we be suspicious of Alec anymore? But this time it fell apart a little quicker because his own brother figured out that he was trying to buy drugs. And the case fell apart very quickly. This is the setup for what we look at and what's going on. And it seems like a story that's far removed from most people's experience because it is. It is a different story like has never been seen before. But the reason is that he is a different man than the kind of stories that we've seen before. This is a different set of circumstances than we've seen before. And it's certainly easy to understand when you have a middle-aged man who's outwardly successful, who has a strong family legacy, who has a prominence in the community and a reputation, but is living a lie. And that leads to and can lead to those pressures being overwhelming and actions like this happening. Husbands have been killing wives, unfortunately, for years, and husbands killing sons goes back as far as King Herod, Charlie further. When those pressures mount and someone becomes a family annihilator. Now the computer input, please. All right. We got to do a little law school. I'm certainly not a professor, but we need to go through a few of the concepts here. And one of the most important concepts is the fundamental role, one of the fundamental roles while y'all are here. As the judge has told you, he's the judge of the law, but y'all are the judge of the facts. And what does judge of the facts mean? Well, a big part of that is that you determine credibility. You determine believability. You determine which witnesses you want to rely on or not rely on. You can rely on a part of a witness's testimony, all the witnesses' testimony, one against many, many against one. It's up to each one of you individually to make that determinations and decisions, and then to collectively discuss those into a group decision. But credibility is important. Is it believable? Is what somebody's telling you believable? And there's many things you can consider in credibility, but a few of those are the demeanor of the witness on the witness stand, whether the witness has a reason to be biased, whether the testimony of the witness was contradicted on one hand or supported or corroborated on another, whether the witness has been dishonest in the past. And again, you can believe witnesses all against one against others, and you can believe portions of a witness's testimony as you see fit. Same thing goes for experts. Expert is a legal determination that allows them to give an opinion. Just because someone's qualified as an expert doesn't mean that you have to accept their opinion. You can judge that based on your assessment of the credibility and the relevance and the believability of that testimony. There's nothing different about that when someone's an expert. Beyond a reasonable doubt, I talked about this at the beginning of the case, and it's our burden. It's a burden we welcome. It's how this system works, that we have to prove the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And what is a reasonable doubt? A reasonable doubt is a doubt that makes a reasonable, honest, sincere juror hesitate to act. It's proof that a reasonable person would not hesitate to rely on in their affairs. But a reasonable doubt is not and leaves you firmly convinced of the guilt of the defendant, but it doesn't have to overcome every possible doubt. It doesn't have to overcome every possible doubt. I used to try a case against a defense attorney, and he would pull up a picture of something. Right here, I have the Mona Lisa. And he would tear off a piece like that and say, ladies and gentlemen, that's reasonable doubt. And my response to that is, you still know what this is, right? You still know what it is. And that's reasonable doubt, okay? If you still know what it is and you're firmly convinced, then it's your duty under the oath that you've taken as the law, as the judge will give you the law to convict the defendant. Direct and circumstantial. Directly proves the existence of the fact, and circumstantial is proof of a chain of facts and circumstances indicating the existence of that fact. And we talked a little bit about that at the beginning. Sometimes people in common discussions will say, oh, the case is just circumstantial. But the law says that doesn't matter. The circumstantial evidence can be just as good as direct evidence. It is just as good. It makes no distinction between that, and the judge will charge you on that. There's no greater degree of certainty required of circumstantial evidence than of direct evidence. The circumstances must be consistent with each other and when taken together point conclusively to the guilt of the defendant. And I gave you all an illustration at the beginning. I'm not going to redo the whole thing, but about being inside. And you go outside and it starts raining, and then you know it's raining, okay, because you got direct evidence, you're getting wet. But if you go inside and you're in a closed room and all of a sudden it gets dark and you hear thunder and you hear the wind rustling and you hear the rain coming down on top of the roof, and then after an hour or so you go outside and the sun's shining, but there's limbs all down in the yard and it's wet as far as the eye can see, and there are puddles in the yard and puddles in the driveway. Is there any reasonable doubt what happened, that it rained? Now, again, I'll say it again. Supposedly, I guess somebody could have sprayed the whole neighborhood with a hose and blown a fan to blow the down, or blow the limbs down, simulate wind, but that's not a reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. Circumstantial evidence can be just as strong as direct evidence. It is just as strong. The law makes no distinction just because it's circumstantial. All right, let's talk about murder. Murder is the willful killing of someone with malice aforethought. It's the unlawful and willful killing of any person by one with malice aforethought. The crime of murder is really, as far as the elements go, fairly simple. The operative terms here, the most important terms, are malice, which is the mental state that the person must have, and aforethought. But let's talk about those. What exactly do they mean? Malice, and it can be any of these. It can be the hatred, ill will, or hostility towards another, but it also can be the intentional doing of a wrongful act with an intent to inflict an injury under the circumstances that the law would infer an evil intent. It could be a general malignant recklessness of the lives and safety of others. It could be a wicked or depraved spirit intent on doing wrong. It could be using firearms, shotgun in a blackout to blow somebody away. That can be malice, ladies and gentlemen, if that's what you decide. Aforethought. Sounds like it has to be planned, and certainly planning would account for a forethought, but it may be conceived at the very moment, a split second, or in conjunction with the act. So a forethought doesn't require planning for that malice to occur. All it has to do is exist in the moment, just a split second, or in the moment that the act occurs. So when that trigger is pulled, as long as there's that intentional doing of a wrongful act, intent to inflict an injury, that would be an evil intent, a malignant recklessness, which you can infer from the circumstances of the case, then that's all you need. And how do you do that? I said infer, because people don't always yell out what their intentions are. You have to infer it from the circumstances of the case itself. Look at the crime scene, look at what happened, look at the backstory, look at all the circumstances that come together, and you can infer malice from those. Last little bit of law school. Malice and drugs. Voluntary intoxication does not impair a person's ability to act with malice aforethought. That's a legal principle. If you voluntarily get intoxicated, it is not a defense to a crime, and it does not negate the malicious nature of that crime. If one voluntarily intoxicates themselves, they are just as responsible for their actions as when they are not intoxicated. And the judge, again, take what the law comes from the judge, but this is a legal principle that you will hear. Voluntary intoxication is not a defense to a crime. And why does the law say that? Well, you can't take whatever it is and deny responsibility for what you've done under the law. All right? I'm going to move through this quickly because we've already talked about it. And just for scheduling, I'm going to have to stop my argument so that we can all eat. But I'll give you all a chance to get away from this for a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and go through some of this that we just talked about, but very quickly. Gathering storm in Alex's life. We talked about the family legacy. You heard of how important that was to him and how important that was to this family and how it was in danger because of the boat case. The criminal charges as well as the civil charges. That legacy was in danger. And it was threatening also to expose him for who he really was, which would totally destroy his part of that legacy. Lose his career, lose his bar license, face consequences like he's never seen. He's also a successful lawyer and a part-time prosecutor. And as we go through and talk about the circumstances of this case and talk about the crime scene and the timeline and all the rest of it, think of it with that in mind. That this is an individual who is trained to understand how to put together cases, complex cases. He's been a prosecutor. He's done complex car wrecks. He understands the law. He's given closing arguments to juries before. So when you have a defendant like that, be thinking about whether or not this individual is constructing defenses and constructing alibis. Talked about his law practice. You've heard how lucrative it is. I had to struggle with him to get him to admit that he was wealthy, making more than $1 million a year. I'll let y'all decide whether or not that's wealthy, but he admitted ultimately that was not uncommon for him to make that much money on top of stealing and borrowing on top of that. The important thing, though, to remember again, and I want to highlight this, is that they get, the way that firm works, they get their money at the end of the year. And then it's up to them to make it last. And that's the big problem that he had. That's why I had to get the Ferris wheels. He can't, if he's out of money in May, he's not going to, unless he can borrow it or steal it, he's out of luck. And the hounds were at the gate. All right, we talked about this. He's got, you heard, I think Jeannie described him as having intentional chaos. We had the land deals. He's servicing this huge debt load. He constantly needs new money coming in. And this has been going on for more than a decade, a constant hamster wheel. The stress and the pressure of that would be extreme because it's been going on for so long, always having to stay one step ahead of the game, always having to beg, literally beg, borrow, or steal for over a decade to have the truth from being exposed. That's been going on all that time. The big cases, his partners think he's straightened it out and paid off his debts, but he hadn't. He's getting paid millions of dollars, but he's stealing on top of that. It's not enough to keep that hamster wheel going. So he borrows and he steals. The methods I mentioned, you got the PSB checks, you got the fake forge, you got fake business expenses, running the firm card, and from his family and his law partners. Each one of these depends on him being able to sit down and look someone in the eye and convince them that what they're doing is right, when in reality that wasn't happening. And all those clients trusted him based on those. And we sat there and went through that, and it may have been exhausting, and I apologize for that, but he couldn't tell you about one conversation that he had that stuck with him. That's how easily it came to him. Is that relevant to your consideration of what he had to say to you? That's for y'all to decide. Couldn't name one conversation. Just had that same answer. And didn't want to talk about any of those individuals who trusted him. As he looked you, asked you to do the same. Down to the bottom. It's not just the client, it's his staff. They're doing the paperwork. They're filling all that out. He had to fast talk them as well. Alex's situation, I think, is akin to a Ponzi. And a Ponzi's kind of like a pyramid scheme where it depends on new money coming in to pay old investors. And it works. It'll work for a long time as long as you can keep that money coming in. But the second you can't, the second that you're out of options, it crashes and burns. That's how every Ponzi and burns. And that's the situation that fundamentally his finances were like. And that's the situation that was arriving in June of 2021 when he was at the scene with the victims minutes before they died and lied to everyone he would listen about. A gathering storm. The boat case, other factors that were arising, each one leading to that inevitable day of reckoning. You had the trial lawyers conference where he was confronted. Mark Tinsley was confronted by Alec. Alec, of course, denied it. Everybody's lying on Alec. Alec's telling you the truth, even though everyone who knew him had no idea who he was. Everyone. No one knew who he really was. The people who came in here and said, we thought this about him, not a single person knew who he really was. That's how convincing he is. But he denies this confrontation when Mark Tinsley was like, he bows up on Mark Tinsley. He's like, what you doing, man, about the boat case? And Mark says, you're going to have to pay money to the Beach family. Millions of dollars. Alec doesn't have that. He's barely one step ahead of the game at this point. He doesn't have insurance coverage anymore, or at least not a big umbrella policy. And why? Because his insurance company dropped him after the Satterfield case. Insurance company thinks the money went to the Satterfield boys, but it didn't. They don't know that he's stolen it all, but they don't want to insure him anymore. So he doesn't have that to help him pay the Beach case. And so what's the one hope he has? And that's the Ferris case. And it's tried, and you get a verdict in February of 2021, $792,000. And eventually, he tells Chris Wilson, I'm going to structure those, which is a lie, and gets the fees sent to him in March. And is spent in 2 months. But the boat case isn't going away. Mark says, show us your books if you're telling me you're broke. I think his testimony was, they said that he could probably cobble together $1 million, which I guess that's broke for him, but it wasn't enough. And so they refuse, and that's what leads to the motion to compel. And there's been a lot of argument about, oh, is that going to be granted or not? Will the judge have granted it? What we do know is that Mark Tinsley said that's what he was seeking to do. And he was seeking to do it because he had been told by the defense that he didn't have money. So he's like, prove it. None of us believe that, knowing what we know about you in this community. Prove it. Well, Alec can't have anybody subpoenaing his financial records because it's all going to be apparent. That forged account is going to open right up. He can't have that happen. It will all end. He'll lose his career. He will lose his livelihood. He will face investigations and consequences like he's been able to avoid his entire life. But if he can just one step ahead, just 1 month longer, 1 day longer, then he's never going to have to face that accountability that he has to face. The hearing is scheduled for June 10th, 2021. And no one's here to argue to you that it's definitely going to be granted. All we're arguing to you is what the witnesses said they were intending to do. As you've seen in court over the past 6 weeks, things happen and a process starts. And once that process starts, there's a conclusion to it. There's a conclusion to that. And then you heard from Tony Satterfield, who got up on the stand and talked about the fact that there was some coverage about this case as we move into the spring of 2021. And he hears from Alec, and Alec lies to him and says, yeah, we're hoping to get this case moving. And you saw the text message to that effect when the reality was that it had already been stolen. How's he going to pay that, ladies and gentlemen? That's millions of dollars. It's millions of dollars. And eventually, they're going to figure out that this money's already been paid. The insurance company thinks it's gone in the right place. At some point, the question is going to get asked, and that alone is going to break everything apart. Ferris case, this is when his paralegal finds the expense check and not the fee check. And I've already told you this part of the story, and y'all have heard the testimony, but it sets off that inquiry from the second juror. So now we have this on top of everything else that we're mentioning. This is like nothing he's ever experienced. He's always been able to stay one step ahead of the game. But after the boat case, his appetite's increased greatly. He started stealing millions of dollars, and now he's running out of options, and all these factors are converging. All they're converging. And they're converging on 1 week, 1 day. And that arrives. His father's in the hospital. There's a confrontation with Jeannie. Alec tells her, manages to ward off the conversation by saying Mr. Randolph is terminal. He, of course, denies that, so I guess Jeannie's lying on him too. But that's what she says happened. He's working on the boat case. And then the tragedy happens. And it worked. It's not the only reason, but it's part of the reason. The pressures on this man were unbearable, and they were all reaching a crescendo the day his wife and son were murdered by him. All on that day. And in the wake of this, everything changes. People stop asking about these things. The community has changed like you would expect. People are concerned, they're scared, they're worried. And everything's changed. The backlash from the boat case has gone away, and all of that has changed. And that's why Mark Tinsley thought his case was over. This may seem like, really? But who would understand that better than him? This is exactly the kind of work he did. His skills as a lawyer were understanding the emotional value of a case, understanding the sympathies of a case. If you have a sympathetic plaintiff and an unsympathetic defendant, that is, in the civil world, that's a big case. But if those get reversed, if those change, if all of a sudden your defendant is more sympathetic, it changes it. It changes the entirety of what Mark Tinsley's position on this case was for the Beach family, that Alec was going to have to pay money. And that's what he told you from the stand. He said the second, if Alec had been the victim of some unsuspect or some random vigilante, the entirety of the case has changed. And I'm not taking the same position. I'm not trying to demand that level of recovery. He gets the $750. Well, he gets $600 of it. Ultimately gets a $750 loan. He convinces Chris Wilson. That heads off to Ferris. That's pretty much the main thing he did after this, was to make sure he could get that money, enough of it to Chris Wilson, so that he would send an email to the law firm saying, hey, everything's cool. I got it. It's all good. And that's what the law firm thought. It's the main thing he did in the wake of the murders of his wife and son, was he made sure to stay, again, one step ahead of the game, because he had more time now. He had time he didn't have on June 7th, but he had it now. And that's the first thing he did. It's the first thing he did. It's the main thing he did, was keep the hamster wheel going. I know it seems like a lot, but you have to consider the unique circumstances of this particular man. This particular man who has proven over and over again that he will do anything to keep that hamster wheel going and to avoid accountability. And he's been doing it for over 10 years. He just finally reached a point that he had never reached before. Of course, the hearing on the motion to compel gets canceled. Who would go forward with that in the wake of what's happened? That goes away. It doesn't, I think you heard from the testimony up there, it doesn't get rescheduled till long after everything crashes and burns in September. It doesn't even get rescheduled in the wake of this. You don't have to worry about that either, and the potential that had for exposing who he was. Because the second somebody looks at his accounts, the second his own partner, Danny Henderson, looks at his accounts as in representing him and says, well, let me see him. He can't do that. He can't do that. He can't even show him to his own partner. Because what's going to happen? They're going to see it too. He can't let that happen, or everything falls apart. And he loses everything, including that legacy that you heard from individuals up. So important to him, more important than anything. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is the timeline. And you can see and I'll let y'all look at that, but you can see how this develops, how this hamster wheel continues, how he always has to be one step ahead of the game. You know, we've talked about the Redbeard and the Zero United. Those are the land deals that went bad. They get charged off, but you have Palmetto State Bank, still dealing with him. He then appoints Russell Lafitte a conservator and borrows up to $1 million from the Plyler girls. accounts without their knowledge. And then he has to steal money from the Badger case, where he's already making a huge amount of legal fees. He has to steal money from the Badger case to pay off the Plowler girls before they turn 18. And then there's an accounting for that. And then he opens up the Forge account. And it continues. $338,000 from Dion Martin. Johnny Bush, Manuel Sanders, and Richard, $225,000. He's maxing out $1 million line of credit. The only way to stay afloat is to beg, borrow, and steal. He's maxing out $1 million line of credit. He steals some more money, but he's right back to where he was. March of 2018, he's now maxed out not only $1 million line of credit, but also a $600,000 line of credit. A line of credit, almost like a credit card, maxed out. Then the boat crash happens, and look what happens to the figures. 3.7 million, 1.1 million, $1 million. And then you have the double homicide. This is some of the exhibits. This is, as you recall, there'll be his statements, and they're in evidence showing the defendant's assets on June 7th, 2021, and the reds are his liabilities. That one's green, but it's negative. And then over here, that's where he was a couple months later. He borrowed $750,000 and still ended up $347,000 in the hole, which part of that had to cover. I think it was called the most generous overdraft policy ever conceived. Because, I mean, in fairness, though, he did get a $5 overdraft charge right there. So, anyway. All right, what else do we have? Because we talked about a lot of things about the finances, and I know that there's been a lot of that, but it's really the only way to understand all the things that were affecting this middle-aged, outwardly successful professional man who had all these pressures upon him, like no one had ever seen. Well, we've got the pills. He claims he's had a pill addiction for 20 years. What does he say about that? He says it makes him paranoid. He says it makes him agitated. He says opiates give him energy. Use your common sense about that. But he also says, and he even said this in the telephone interview after the side of the road, that the withdrawals will make you do anything to get rid of them. That's common sense as well. We know how powerful opiates can be and how the addiction of opiates can be extremely powerful. The withdrawals, not being dope sick, can be extremely powerful. But he's also saying he's taking 1,000 milligrams a day. And he's trying to blame all his theft on that. But that's not what these records reflect. They reflect an insatiable desire for money and a hamster wheel that's been going on for a long time. And you don't really see the escalation from his drug dealer until March of 2021. I would ask you also, one of the tenets of juries is common sense. That's what you're here for, is for an individual and then a collective common sense. Common sense, 1,000 milligrams a day. Does that sound survivable? He sat there on that stand and told you that's what he was taking. And as we're going to go through this process, we're going to talk about what he said on the stand and how many times on the fly that he looked you in your eyes and didn't tell you the truth. He's very good at it. His own partner said that. He's very, very good at it. I'll leave it to you to decide whether 1,000 milligrams a day is survivable with opiates. And if it was, that you could still engage in work, have a successful practice, and then on top of that, engage in these complex conspiracies to steal and fool everyone and live a life and have people outwardly think that you're who you profess to be in public, if you were taking 1,000 milligrams a day. Does that make common sense? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't. I have no doubt that he was taking opiate pills. But I think he looked you, and I would submit to you to decide whether or not he looked you in the eye and claimed them out as inconsistent with whatever else we know about this man. That's really inconsistent with survivability as a matter of common sense. He can never function at the level he's been functioning, keeping up with these pressures, staying one step ahead for over a decade if he was taking that much dope. I would submit to you. Just one other lie that I would submit to you as a lie that he's trying to get you to believe, to feel sympathetic for him, as if the dope was the cause of the money and the cause of his issues, when the reality is it wasn't. This had been going on for a long time, and the finances proved differently. But what else about this? You've seen the interviews. We're going to play some clips of these interviews, but I'm not going to play them all for you again. You've watched them. But if you have any questions, go back and watch them. He talks about being paranoid. Listen, watch those interviews when he's with Dave Owen. He doesn't look like he's withdrawing from any drugs. His responses are appropriate. He's not in displaying any paranoia. He's smooth. He's focused on the events. He's focused on trying to get information about the case from law enforcement officers, which is interesting in its own right. Why is he so focused on that? And in Savannah, where supposedly he was detoxing, he sat down, as you've heard the testimony, with a composite sketch artist and went through the whole process to come out with this picture, which I swear is not me. How do you do that? How do you do that if you're on that much dope? So why did he tell you that, ladies and gentlemen? Why did he look you in the eye and tell you that as he sat there on that stand trying to explain what was going on? It's interesting also that in one of the interviews with law enforcement, there were 3 interviews, June 8th, June 10th, and August 11th, before we get to the side of the road, that he mentions that Paul was a little detective. That's very interesting for him to mention that, because you heard from Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister, that Maggie called Paul that, the little detective, specifically in reference to Paul paying attention and trying to keep Alec from taking pills. Why would he bring that up? That's an interesting thing to bring up, because that was what that was in reference to. And what do we know? We know that in May, if we talk about all the pressures that are coming upon him, all these financial things that we've talked about, this exhausting hamster wheel that's been going on forever, the need to beg, borrow, and steal, stay one step ahead, and he's running out of options there. On top of that, we know in May that Paul sends a text to him saying, "Mom found some pills. We need to talk." Mom found some pills and we need to talk. Another pressure from Paul and Maggie on him. And if you look at the texts, the weekend of the ball game on June the 7th, and those are in evidence, Alec is not at the game. And he's texting back and forth, and Maggie's like, "Don't come if you feel bad." And he's like, "Well, I think I can get a late checkout." And then he's like, "At 1 o'clock, leave." I submit to you, it's a reasonable inference they were on him at this time. They were watching him like a hawk. opiates, the most powerful of withdrawals. And everything's coming to a head, including this as well. Run out of money, running out of options, doesn't get paid in any significant way until December, already stole the Ferris fees and spent that money in 2 months, has an expensive pill habit, and accountability and consequences will undo everything in his life, everything that is his self-identity, everything, the only things that he cares about. He doesn't care about lying to his partners and his family and his friends and his clients if it will delay accountability for him. He'll do it in a heartbeat. And all of that is about to be undone.
We had a good stopping point.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take 1 hour and 15 minutes for lunch. Please do not discuss the case.
I wonder how much longer his closeness will be, because that means it's limited time for. Yeah, that is true. Most of those rich people still in debt.
Attorneys get to do today.
They just fill their cups with air so it looks full. I completely agree. Full of air like a bag of chips. Absolutely. And then it all settles, and then you notice the bag is half empty. All right, well, I'm going to take this time to take a break as well. It's at 1 hour and 15 minutes, so that means close to 1:30, 1:25. So I'm going to shoot to be back here around 1:30. I might be a little bit later than that. But if not, again, Law and Crime, Court TV, there's some other news stations that are streaming this. I just like being able to be here because the rest of them are so full of people in the comments. I can't have a conversation. I just want to chat about it while we do it. So I'll see you guys later. Thank you for being here. And I don't really know. I always end it with don't kill your family, but don't kill your family.